Welcome to Free Will Dreams interview portion for this month. My name's Austin. We have a great guest for you this time, somebody who brings a wealth of knowledge and information to the table, and I'm excited to get right into it. I want to welcome Mario Pinardo, the founder and CEO of Achievement Dynamics Institute, and more recently, Achievepedia.com. Welcome, Mario.
Thank you, Austin. It's nice to be here.
Great.
Thanks. I appreciate you asking me to be on.
And I appreciate you coming to do this. And what's interesting is the way you and I met. And just as a segue into this, a quick story that there was an event that I didn't want to go to. And a mutual friend, Al Banfi, said, "Hey, why don't you go to this?" And when I got there, he said, "You got to meet Mario." So I met Mario, and we hit it off right away. And sure enough, we're sitting here. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview.
And by the way, when I walked in, Al Banfi said, "You got to meet Austin." So
okay,
he was kind of like the matchmaker.
So just a point, when you make a decision, the right people kind of show up at the right time, and I liken that to you and I meeting at that time.
Me too. Thanks, Austin.
So it's great. So I want to just go through a little bit of your bio and resume so people know what you're bringing to the table, because as I got to know you and learn what you're doing, I am more impressed each time we meet and talk, and I'm excited to get to that. So I just want to bring up the point that you have 29 plus years in training, personal development, success coaching, nonprofits, corporate America, medical industry, and even schools, right?
20 school systems.
20 school systems down to the high school level.
Yeah, you have grade school, high school, college.
Right, so you're making an impact across the board, not just for a specific segment, so you're really having an impact. You've done about 2,000 plus workshops, I think?
Yeah, workshops, seminars, speaking engagements, 2,000 plus.
2,000 plus. You've helped over thousands of people, and I got to throw this in here. You did stand-up comedy at one point too, right?
Yeah, back in the 70s. That was my first dream.
That was your first dream, okay.
Yeah.
We'll definitely get into that. And I don't want to overlook the most important success is that you are a loving husband and father.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right?
One of the greatest successes in my life is a happy marriage and beautiful daughter.
Right, and I'm going to bring this up too, because just talk about your contribution, is that your wife recently got spotlighted in a local magazine under the heading Superwomen. And your wife was one of these ladies, right?
Yeah. Well, people have told her for years, you must really be an amazing woman to stay married to that guy. So she finally got an award.
Well, the reason why I brought that up is that she is one of the point people in a local program called The Bridge, right? And I wanted to bring it up because you frequently go there and help her, right?
Yeah. Well, The Bridge is a adolescent empowering center right in the heart of Kansas City that she started back in 1980.
Right.
And it's quite a powerful process. 34 years now she's been at it, and I've been with her since I've met her. And really, it was her program that inspired me opening up Achievement Dynamics Institute back in 1985.
That's phenomenal. And your experience is deep, and I'm really excited to get into your story because you didn't just show up here. You got 29 years experience of working with people. And the other thing is 9 years on a project that you've been working on, which we're going to get into. 9 years in the making, you've been working on something, and we're going to get into that as well. So let me jump right into these questions. The first thing I always start with is, what was your childhood dream? Did you have a childhood dream? What was it? And did it carry over? Or did it change? So can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, I think I know exactly what it was.
Okay.
Now, I used to love the Red Skelton show.
Okay.
Now, a lot of people may not even remember Red Skelton, but back in the 60s, he had a monologue. Well, Red Skelton was an old-time famous, funny fella, and he had a monologue in the beginning of the show, and he would make people laugh. And I can remember being 7 years old and asking my sister, "What is he doing?" And she said, "He's making people laugh." And so I would watch intently, and he had these jokes, these two seagulls named Gertrude and Heathcliff, and he'd be like doing that. And I would remember his jokes and run to the bathroom mirror and try to repeat what he just said.
Okay.
And I just became so amazed at anyone that was a comedian. I just thought they were like the coolest people. So Red Skelton was my hero, then Johnny Carson was my hero, and by the time I was 12 or 13 years old, I had my own joke library of must have had like 200 jokes that I memorized, and I used to love to tell jokes. So that was my first dream was to be a stand-up comedian.
And you did that.
Yeah.
You followed through and you did
Yeah,
that for
yeah.
sure. How long did you do that?
From 1977 to 1982.
1982.
So
So
5 years.
and that gave you great training ground to do what you're doing
Oh,
now
yeah.
with the speaking and what you previously did with Achievement Dynamics.
Yeah, I definitely had to work on myself. First of all, I stuttered.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I had to overcome stuttering. I mean, I was pretty funny in the beginning because I was a stuttering kid. So people were laughing more at me than they were
Right,
with me.
right.
But I mentally overcame the stuttering thing. And of course, writing material and telling stories was something that I just enjoyed doing. And of course, going it alone. That sometimes in life, you have to, when you're up there on stage, and there's 100 people in the audience and no one's laughing, you got to figure it out. Like there's no lifeline.
Right.
So it was a great training ground. Being young, I was 20 to 25 when I was doing comedy. So that was a good 5 years of life experiences, handling rejection,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So
Mhm.
I think it helped mold me
Mhm.
into who I am today.
Great.
Mhm.
So you learned early on the value of a dream, whether you knew what was going on or not, and you pursued it and you did it. And that leads me into this next question. And I know you've got other dreams that you're working on and the one we're going to get into, but what was your life like before you truly discovered your dream? And you can talk about maybe the most recent dream or something that resonates with you, maybe to create some contrast between this, before and then after you started to pursue your dream.
Mhm. Well, when I was a kid, besides my twin brother, we were, he had a few pounds on me, but
Okay.
we were the shortest, chubbiest kids in the whole school, like in the whole class. I mean, if you saw pictures, it's pretty fun. I was pretty funny looking, with the buzz cut and the white socks and black shoes, and then of course when you were my size, they took you to the husky department at Penny's.
Okay.
So they dressed you in clothes that was really designed for portly men over 60. So you had the dorkiest clothes, and you went to school, and I really felt inferior. I really felt inferior. Now, fortunately, I was the class clown, so I had plenty of friends.
Okay.
So I never felt lonely. I only felt inferior, and there's a difference.
Mhm,
So
sure.
as I became a teenager, and I had to go to a new high school, I was getting teased. I was getting ridiculed. And I made a list one day of all the things I didn't like about myself. I didn't like my hair. I had a stupid, haircut. Everybody had long hair, and I was still getting some weird haircut because I went to my dad's barber. Still had the dorky clothes. And I just made a list of every single thing that I thought that someone could criticize me for, and I put together a goals program. And I just started to change whatever I could change and accept whatever I couldn't change. And I pretty much have, in fact, I even brought my first goals program with me.
You did?
Yeah. This is ninth grade.
Okay.
This was my goals program.
Okay.
All right, it had roughly about 300 quotes that I saved from like books I was reading, or I call them power phrases. As you can see, there's page after page.
Can you share one of them with us?
And,
just picking one out, just random? One.
Well, and just, okay, number 3. An attitude, and I haven't read this from,
Okay,
someone.
that's fine.
An attitude is a tendency to respond to some person, object, or situation in a positive or negative way. We cannot see attitudes directly. If we infer them from things people do, and they're the invisible thoughts that power our lives. Like I read
Wow.
that when I was in ninth grade.
Wow.
So
Wow,
I was
that's impressive.
I was saving this stuff, and I was even writing poems about goals.
How about that?
So I became kind of like obsessed, of setting goals. When I was 13, it was a dirt bike. When I was 14, it was a horse. When I was 16, I got my pilot's license. So by the time I was 16 years old, I had a motorcycle, a horse, and my pilot's license. People had to drive me to the airport so I could fly. I didn't get my driver's permit until I was 17.
That's a great story.
And I just was, it's really just what's next. And I felt that anything that I was going to enjoy, it was up to me to create. So that's how the whole goal setting thing. You see, once I started to see that I could change myself, I knew that I could change the world around me and make it what I wanted. So that was very empowering. So
absolutely.
And meanwhile, I didn't like school because school was an interruption of my life. I was having such a fun life out of school that to me, I realized when I was a kid, whatever whatever punishment you gave me for not doing my homework always felt less painful than doing homework. So
Okay.
school to me was nothing but an interruption. I just wanted my 2.0, give me my C, get me out of here. And I can remember being in 11th grade, and the guidance counselor calls me in and says, "What do you want to do when you get out of school?" And I said, "Well, I'm a pilot. I want to be a commercial pilot." And he looks at my grades, all C's, and he goes, "You could never be a commercial pilot. You don't have the math." And I said, "Well, then I want to be a veterinarian. I love my horse. I love horses. I love animals. I love my dog. I think I could really be a good veterinarian." He says, "You can never be a veterinarian. You don't have the science." And he says, "Look, you're not college material." He says, "I'm going to get you a job, and you'll be leaving here at 11:30 every day, and I'll get you a job from 1 to 5. And he got me a job on the waterfront in Gloucester City, New Jersey, at a caulking factory. And you went in at 1 o'clock, and by 2 o'clock you were covered in caulk. Everybody walked around smelling like gasoline, and people had 5-year pins and 10-year pins, and I was panicked. I said, "Is this what this guy thinks I'm going to do for the rest of my life? I'm going to work in a caulking factory?" And so I missed my whole senior year of school. I went to school like 2 hours a day, and then I was in this caulking factory. And so I decided when I got out of high school that I was going to go into stand-up comedy. I said, "Well, I'll just pursue that career." I did end up going to college, a couple years later and getting a degree, but pretty much I felt that I had to go figure this thing out. And it wasn't going to be through an education. It was going to be through imagination, and that just went along with the whole goal-setting thing.
Wow.
So that's how it kind of that's how it kind of directed me out into just creating.
Yeah. You said a lot there, and I know through talking with you prior to this interview and meeting you, I know your journey started early on, and you learned in ninth grade what some people spend their whole lives trying to learn. But the point there to take out is it doesn't matter how old you are. It can happen whenever you decide it can happen at any time, and you learned early on. And the other thing that I thought interesting about what you were saying is the guidance counselor to me kind of represents the world and what people will tell you. They'll try to define who you are, but you're much bigger than that, and you kind of proved that through your journey. Your journey was just different, and nobody can sit there and tell you, what it's going to be. But those goals served you at a very young age, and it's amazing that what you've done, like even in high school, achieving those things.
Well, I think I had to make a decision. Am I the person that people are saying I am, or am I the person that I know I am? And so I had to stop caring about what people said I was and just become who I knew I was, and just keep focusing on that and just keep adding to it. So, to me it was my escape route, and unfortunately people do sometimes become the person that other people think they are.
Yeah.
And it limits their whole life.
That's true. A lot of people do that, and that's why I'm doing this work. To get some people to take a look at differently and start to believe in their possibilities. You kind of talked about my next question, which is how did you discover your dream? But maybe we can talk about your most recent dream. Like, how did you discover that?
Well, it all kind of is like one big dream.
Okay.
To be honest with you.
Okay. Let's talk about it.
I'm pretty fortunate that I always knew what I wanted to do. And which was, and somehow or another, it's all kind of evolved that way. Back in 1977, when I was learning how to do comedy, I met a fella who was a professional comedian, Tom Dreesen, and he's still around today.
Okay.
He was appearing at the Latin Casino, and I got a chance. I wrote him a few jokes and sent it backstage, and I signed it, future comedian, and he was a gracious enough man that he invited me backstage to coach me after the show.
Wow.
And he spent an hour with me, and he said, and during that hour, he taught me a lot. And one thing he did say, "I'm going to give you a list of books to read." And the books were, a few of them were Psycho-Cybernetics, Think and Grow Rich, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, The Magic of Believing. There were 10 on the list. And he says, I don't know of any books that teach you how to do comedy. This is 1977. But these books, you learn what's in these books, and you can do anything you want to do with your life. So he gave me these books, and he said, in life, start where you are, work as often as you can, and don't stop, and you'll be successful. So I took these titles of these books, and I took that, and I bought all these books, and I started outlining each book. I would outline it like I was studying to be a brain surgeon. And after all these outlines and all this information, and that I kept adding, I said, wow, if you can learn this in books, then why can't you teach it in a school? And so I can tell you almost the exact date. It was April 17th, 1977, that I said, I think I could put a school together around this material, and that's what went in the back of my mind as I went on to pursue comedy. In the back of my mind, I always thought that, boy, you know, if comedy doesn't work out, one day I'd like to have a school just teaching people how to set and achieve goals.
Wow, that's
So,
amazing.
so it all kind of blended together.
Right, that's amazing. And I want to catch this. I don't want to miss this because this is really important. You made a decision.
Mm-hmm.
You sought out somebody who was doing what you wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really key point. A lot of people, and I do that in my work, is that one of the ways you build your belief level up is you find somebody and get around them who's already doing what you want to do, and you did that.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you knew what you were doing at the time or not, you did that. And that person recommended things to you, and you went out and did it. And that moment right there probably
Mm-hmm.
changed the whole course, or at least made what seems so far off become a lot closer and more possible for you. And could you talk about your belief level, like before you met with that person and then after?
Well, you know, I didn't know how to do comedy. I didn't know anyone that knew how to do comedy. And there was a place in Cherry Hill called the Latin Casino.
Mm-hmm.
And every week they had a different act. And either the headliner was a comedian and the opening act was a singer, or the headliner was a singer and the opening act. And I said, boy, if I could just afford to buy a ticket every week to the show. And I said, well, wait a minute, I'll get a job there. So I started knocking on the door. They had 115 waiters and waitresses, and they weren't hiring. But you know what? They were so tired of seeing me after 3 weeks come by every day and say, now are you hiring? Now are you hiring? That the lady said, look, show up tomorrow, you know, you're hired. And I knew that I was now in comedy school. So I could watch every comedian at every show, and because I could walk around the room, I was a waiter. I would stand 20 feet from them. They would be on stage at Latin. There'd be 2,000 people in the audience. We had two shows a night, 2,000 a la carte dinners to serve every night. Twice, and once dinners were served and the comedian came on, I would position myself 20 feet from Don Rickles or 20 feet from whoever the comedian was, Freddie Roman at the time, and all the guys, and I would say, okay, now I just got to figure out how to get 20 feet over, and I would visualize that it was my show and I was doing this. And so I didn't know there was even a thing called visualization. I just knew that this is what I did to kind of get myself geared into what I was doing. And then it was because of that connection that Mater D told Tom Dreesen that I was an inspiring comedian and he got me backstage. So it was, whenever you want to reach a goal, you have to look at what are all the areas of my life that I need to kind of put towards this direction. And I just I got lucky, but the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Absolutely. And two other things there is proximity. You got close to these guys,
Mm-hmm.
and you were persistent to get there. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a great story, man. There's so many things in there. So I hope people are listening and may want to take some notes down because there's some really great things in there.
And plus, Tom Dreesen spent 1 hour with me,
Right.
and he changed my life. He gave me these books, he gave me some advice, and he was a gracious man, and I felt that that's how I want to be.
Right, and you could say that was actually a trigger point, but think about what you did to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like your decision, and then that guy showed up.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
We have one of our favorite sayings in Achievopedia is, big doors swing on small hinges. Big doors, and when you look at the most amazing events that ever happened in your life, the people that made the biggest impression, it could have been your wife or you were at the right place at the right time. What brought you to that? And if you keep going back to what exactly made that happen, it might have been getting on an elevator at a certain time. It might have been just happened to walk in a room at a certain time.
Show up at an event that you weren't going to go to.
Yeah, you and I may be working together for the rest of our lives,
Right.
and we happen to be at that event at the same time.
Right.
So big doors swing on small hinges. We can't judge what an opportunity is or isn't, because opportunities come from the smallest of moments.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the moment when you believed that the dream was actually possible? Like when it became, this is possible, I can do this.
Mm-hmm. I remember the moment when the dream became a goal.
Okay.
And by the time I was, in my 20s, I thought everything was possible, because every goal I had pursued, I had achieved. And even not stuttering was something that I didn't think I'd ever be able to, but I didn't go into learning not to stutter thinking I was going to fail. So whether I'm a blind optimist or whatever, I just tend to keep working at something, and I would say, if someone else did it, then I should be able to learn how to do it. So I had very good visualization skills, where I would just absorb whatever it is I wanted to achieve, and it would become part of almost how actors take on the role of a new person.
Right.
Once I knew what the goal was, I just kept living it in my head, and it became such a reality that I would do whatever I could every day to get one step closer. So anyway, in 1985, I was done doing comedy. I had a real job. My wife was working the bridge program. I was helping her with the youth in Camden, and something happened that changed the whole course of my life. I went to visit my mom one day, and she's packing a suitcase. And I said, "Where are you going?" She goes, I've had this pain in my side for a couple of weeks, and actually a little longer, and they're going to do some tests, And 10 days later, on my 28th birthday, she died. She had liver cancer. No one knew it. And I realized, 60 years old, this woman was never sick a day in her life that I would know, that I could remember. And I said, wow, that made such an impact that she died so quickly. And then on my birthday, and I said, no one can ever control the quantity of their life. They can only control the quality of their life. And the number one asset that we have is our ability to create opportunity through goal setting. So that was the moment where I said, I'm going to take all those years of doing public speaking, I'm going to take all these notes, I'm going to take my wife's system of group dynamics, and that was April 11th, 1985, and the next morning I told my wife, I said, I'm going to start achievement dynamics. I didn't know what it was called back then, but I called it my goal setting school. And she says, when? And I says, July 1st. And she said, how are you going to do that? And I said, well, I'm going to follow Tom Dreesen's advice. I'm going to start where I am. I'm going to work as often as I can and not stop. And I'm just going to keep making this school. So I quit my job July 1st, spent the summer developing workshops. And my very first workshop, I rented a room for $25, and I brought this shoebox with me. I put a hole in it, and I had a flyer. I just wrote a flyer called Seeds for Growth, and it talked about the agenda of the workshop, and it said, what you are is God's gift to you. What you become is your gift to God. And it said, learn how to set and achieve goals, build courage and confidence, learn organization skills, stress management, time control, increase imagination, and self-motivation. And four people showed up. Right? One was my wife, and 3 women I didn't know. And the 3 women I didn't know each put $1 in the shoebox. And that was the beginning of what is now achieved.
Is that what the shoebox was for? Was it a contribution?
That was. I put an index card here that said free will offering, and I put it next to my podium.
Okay.
And on the way out, after I did the workshop, it was a 90-minute workshop. On the way out, each of the women put $1 in the shoebox, and that was the beginning of.
That's a great story. And the other thing I love is that most people think they got to have all this high-tech stuff and do all this stuff. You had a shoebox.
Yeah.
and a printed flyer. So you don't need everything to be perfect. You don't need all the best equipment, you just need to move forward.
Again, using Tom Dreesen's advice, start where I am,
right.
Work as often as I could, and that was probably about 2,400 workshops ago,
Wow.
So, by 1990 I was doing 200 workshops a year at the Institute, at my office. So it really just kept evolving. Mm-hmm.
It's great. It's amazing. I like to tap into people's emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know we think with our logic, but there's the emotional side. What was was there a particular emotion involved or an event that triggered you to finally go after it? We covered it, but can you tap into maybe how you felt? Like, because you said in the beginning you felt inferior.
Mm-hmm. So
at some point you crossed over. You felt inferior and you started studying, and you hit like a tipping point where your beliefs just started to go through the roof. So what was the emotion? Could you describe that?
Well, I think the truth of the matter is, every time we see progress in our life through any successes, we build our self-esteem. So we have to always live a life of progress. And any time that you can recognize progress, and every day, when you go to bed every day, you have to really be thinking, what progress did I make today? Because tomorrow's more progress, and next week, and so progress gives a sense of achievement. Achievement builds self-esteem. Mm-hmm. Self-esteem opens our eyes to want to go, and you have the belief you can go after the next thing and the next thing, and it snowballs. That when I opened up Achievement Dynamics Institute, I was hoping to have, you know, a small area of South Jersey as my clientele. Now with Achievopedia, I'm looking at a global market,
Right.
bringing on 10 million members, you know, in the next 2 years, and everyone working with each other.
Mhm.
So you don't just go from the shoebox to the global market,
Right.
you know, but as your confidence starts to build, and over the years, as you know, when I got my motorcycle, when I got my horse, and when I got my pilot's license, you know, they weren't easy, you know, but when I finally did achieve it, it told me I could achieve, you know. So and I wasn't anyone special. I was just someone that was building that muscle. So it's a muscle of confidence and belief, because when you believe in the beginning before you start something that you're going to achieve it, then all of your the computer in your brain starts figuring it out for you. So it's almost like you program your mind that this is where I'm going, and I'm not going to stop until I get there. It took 9 years to develop Achievopedia. I figured it was a 3-year plan. But you know what? At 5 years, I had to look at the progress I was making. I wasn't failing because I didn't do it in 3 years or 5 years. And believe me, a lot of people thought that I had lost my mind because I was like the mad scientist, kept working on it and kept working on it. But I saw it getting bigger and bigger. You know, there's an old story about, they said every time, and there was the Mount Everest Club. Now I don't know if this is true or not, but every time someone would either climb Mount Everest or die on Mount Everest, they had this banquet at this restaurant, and someone would come up and say a few words. And this one event, they had lost 7 climbers, you know, and it was a very somber event. And the fellow that was told to give the speech that night, they had this mural of Mount Everest behind the podium, and all he said was, he looked at the mountain and he said, "We're getting bigger, you're not." And the perspective that I took from that story is, whatever goal that you have, you hold that goal in front of you, and you have to just keep making yourself bigger and bigger and bigger, and make your achievements bigger and bigger. And what happens sooner or later, it just totally captures the goal, because the goal is the same goal. You just have to get big enough to be able to achieve it, and mentally and progressively.
Yeah, and one of the things I learned from you, and I kind of knew it, but when you verbalized it, it made me validate even more. And I think it's to the point of your story with Achievopedia, is the chronological time versus the carological time.
Mm-hmm.
I would love you to just maybe touch on that, because I think that when people set out to do something, they're looking for instant results, or their logical brain's going, I got to see this, and when it doesn't happen, that belief can start to wane. But if you understand the carological time, you can really start to realize that it has to play out as a process that may not have a specific time to it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times people are succeeding and they don't know it.
That's right.
They don't know it.
That's right.
Because they put together dates of when they're going to, whether it be a diet program or whether it be building a business or whatever. The reason why, you know, it's about changing perspective. And the Greeks had 2 ways to measure time. They had the chronological calendar, which is the calendar that we use today. They also had something called carological. And carological, they consider the growth measurement of time. And sometimes it's called the faith measurement of time, where we pray in chronological time and God answers in carological time.
Right.
And when He's good and ready, you know.
That's
and
good.
So if you're planting pumpkins, chronologically, you could say, you know, May 15th, I'm going to turn the soil, when you're going to plant the seeds, when you're going to cultivate, when you're going to fertilize, when you're going to weed. All that can be put in chronological time. You can't say on September 28th, I'm going to pick 10 12-pound pumpkins for my pumpkin patch.
Right.
When the pumpkins finally mature, how many you have, how big they are, that's all in carological time.
Right.
I mean, if someone did all that work for 4 months and they still didn't get pumpkins, they're not going to pull out the pumpkin patch and say, I mean, for 4 months I've been working on this and my pumpkins aren't anywhere. And so people they pull their goals out of the root and throw it out, and they think they failed when the pumpkins just weren't ready to appear yet.
Right.
You see?
Right.
And so that's why I knew moving into something as big as creating a worldwide internet system, I knew that as long as I could keep the dream alive, I could achieve it, because it was a matter of just figuring it out and, you know, solving all the problems along the way.
Right.
So we have to become master problem solvers, and we have to realize that every time Give me a person that has no problems, I'll show you a person that has no goals. Problems instantly create goals. We have to be able to live with our problems, and every day you have to think in terms of solving problems. And that's where you go. You have to, what's the most important problem I have to solve right now, and what are problems I can start solving that's going to come up down the road. You don't always foresee all your problems, but you have to take everything as an opportunity. Behind every problem is a gift. You solve the problem, you get the gift. You go to the next door. So it's taking one problem at a time, sometimes two or three at a time, but it's just working on those. And when you have the confidence that you can solve problems, the philosophy that I embrace is no problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking. No problem can withstand the assault of sustained
That's a great
thinking.
quote.
And the computer up there, you put that on the problem, and even when you're not physically working or thinking about the problem, that computer up there is taking all this data that you've ever saw or learned or experienced, and is putting all this data through all these evaluations. And sometimes our subconscious mind speaks to us in just moments of inspiration, and suddenly you know what the answer is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to steal on your metaphor there, so we could go back to the pumpkin patch and say the problems are the weeds. You don't get mad that the weeds showed up, you just pull them out and move on.
Figure out a way to get rid of them.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. Well, this is we talked about the belief, but maybe we could put a number to it. What was your belief level before you decided to pursue your dream? And then what was your belief level after you started to pursue your dream? And this speaks to what you just said about progress, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just talked about how progress builds self-esteem. So where were you before on the scale of 1 to 10? And then after you decided to go after it, maybe you could put that on a scale to measure.
Well, I have to say that belief is something that I've always had. Belief and faith, is something that has always been my biggest assets. What you really need to deal with is fear. That because you have belief doesn't mean you don't have fear.
Right.
I believed I could build whatever goal I was working on, but I always feared that I would fail. But the belief was I can do it. But now the fear that you wake up with, saying, "Well, I'm really out there. I've made this public, statement. I've spent this much money. I've put this much in the works. I'm telling everyone I'm going to do this because I believe I'm going to do it. But there's no guarantee that I'm going to do this.
Right.
And that fear sometimes can turn into a lot of different negative feelings and anxiety. And you have to learn how to direct your anxiety, because there's being anxious is good. You see, it's almost like getting up for the game.
Yes.
And so anxiousness creates a higher level of creativity and concentration. Anxiety takes it away. So there's a bell curve that it's okay to be anxious, but you got to keep it on the positive side. And just like stress is good, distress is bad. So it's being able to ride that crest where you have enough anxiousness and stress that it's keeping you at the top of your game, and you're thinking and you're creating, and your energy level is way up there, and all of your senses are just taking in everything every moment of the day, trying to figure out how this thing's going to work. At the same time, if you tip it over, if you don't learn how to control it, if you tip it over, you can become depressed. You can become you can turn imagination into worry, and that's what worry actually is. It's imagination that's going out of control.
Right.
So you have to really rein that in, and you have to learn how to embrace your fears. And it's perfectly okay to be scared. It's perfectly okay to fear is something that goes with the territory of stepping into your comfort zone to be all you're being called to be. And once you can embrace fear, then you can do anything.
So that leads me to the next question. So what did you do? We talked a little bit about it, but to move past fear and to build the belief.
Mm-hmm. Well, victories, any victory, like back in 1986, I went over to Camden High School, and I spoke to the principal of Roletta Cream, and she was a dynamic woman, and she knew my wife's program from the Camden school systems, and I called her up, and she gave me an appointment, and I said, Miss Cream, I said, if you give me like a dozen kids, seniors preferably, I want to teach them how to set and achieve goals. And she said, a dozen kids? I'm giving you the whole senior class. So next thing I knew, the following Thursday, I have 140 kids from Camden High all being ushered into the library, like 2 or 3 classes at a time, and the teachers would leave them there, and it's like me and 40 kids at a time, and they gave me a blackboard, and they go, okay, teach these kids how to achieve goals. And it was my first official training. So I just walked them through the process. Every week I would just bring in another class, another topic, and so one week I missed, and I didn't realize the impact I was making until I came back the following week, and the teachers said these kids were nuts that Mr. Mario wasn't going to be in. I didn't tell them I wasn't going to be in. I figured it was no big deal. I would just skip a week, But at the end of the year, at the end of the school year, I was there February and March in 1986, and in May, a teacher wrote me a letter, and he said 70% of the students that came to your class increased their grade point average almost 1 full grade from your second class, from the week of your second class, and kept it up the rest of the year. And I still have that letter today, and that letter inspired me to keep on going.
Wow, that's amazing.
So you look at anything, and so it's those victories, that letter to me was the proof that even though I didn't really know what I was doing, it was really my best shot. And these kids, I didn't know how well I was doing, but that told me that I was on to something. That said, you were successful, you did help these kids. If you could really keep doing this, you could help millions. So that was, so that's what keeps the inspiration.
Now we're gonna get into the millions here shortly.
Mm-hmm.
Can you recall the first thing you did after you decided to pursue your dream? What did you feel or think?
Scared, because
fear. There's the fear again.
Yeah, I mean, really, I made a decision that there was no plan B. Once I knew what I wanted to do, I couldn't picture myself being happy doing anything else. So it was really it was until I could figure it out, I was afraid that I was going to fail. And I'd have to go into a career that I didn't have any passion for. You see, when I wanted my first motorcycle, I can remember I didn't have a motorcycle, and I would dream about it. I would ride my bicycle to the motorcycle shop 2 towns away and just sit on the cycle that I wanted, and it became something that I didn't know what the word was, but I was passionate about it. When I was learning how to fly airplanes, I became passionate about it. So at a very young age, I knew what passion was, even though I didn't know what it was called, and
right.
And the couple of jobs that I had, I wasn't passionate, and it felt like work. It felt like I would watch my hours, like how many more hours I got to stay here. And I knew I'd be passionate about teaching people how to set and achieve goals. I knew that I would never stop being passionate about that. And so my biggest fear was not being able to do that.
Wow.
I couldn't live with that fact.
Yeah.
So I had to. I had no choice.
Yeah.
I had no choice but to keep on going, because I knew I would not have a happy life if I didn't do it. So no matter what, and thank God I married a woman that said, do whatever you got to do. As hard as it was sometimes to keep the dream alive, she's never said, you need to stop now, because you got to go out and get a job.
Yeah.
She just, and the few times when I almost lost everything because I risked so much at one time or whatever, and it wasn't working out in time. And one time we almost lost her house, and she said, and I said, honey, I'm sorry that I put us in this situation. And she said, Mario, she says, I don't care about the house. I'm worried about you. She says, how are you going to deal with the fact that you lost your dream? She was worried about my feelings about the dream.
That's when you know you got a good woman there.
Yeah, she says, we can get another house. We can get another house. She says,
That's
how are you going to deal with doing this for all these years? And now it's all collapsing. And she says, I'm worried about how you're going to. So it's good to make sure that you connect yourself with people that believe in you, because that's major.
The people you surround yourself with. And just one other point that I want to bring up, and what I do in my work, is that I teach people that once you identify with your dream and you start to put goals underneath of it, the self-improvement follows. Because you were doing things, you didn't know what you were doing at the time.
Right.
But you were so passionate about the goals that you had, that you instinctively started to do those things. You went and got yourself around the motorcycle. You got yourself around a person who was doing what you're doing. You did all these things, whether knowingly or unknowingly. And I believe that when you truly get to that passion point, and you truly identify what it is that you meant to do, and you get excited about it, you're gonna automatically grow. The right tools you're going to learn, the right people are going to show up. You're just going to grow instinctively. You're going to do things that you may not realize, but they're going to have a direct, major impact on your growth and your progress, which leads to high self-esteem and ultimately fulfilling your dream.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to see other people pursue their dreams. I mean, it's what could be more satisfying than to see people take paths in their lives that they opened up. And I take no credit except the fact that I told them what perspectives they needed to be able to follow their dreams. You know, when they say you can't change the world, to be honest with you, when you help someone change their perspectives, you've totally changed their world. You've totally changed your world.
That's right.
I saw it back in the 80s, and to this day, with my wife's program in Camden. You know, I can remember back in '82, a young boy dropped in the program one night, and she has very clear guidelines. You know, you're going to behave when you're here. You're going to act like a gentleman type of guidelines, right? And Jose was just all over the place. You know, he was poking people. He just really disrupted the whole night. And the other kids were like, oh, tell Jose that, he can't come back. He ruined this. And Renee calls Jose to the side, and she says, Jose, I got to talk to you. So he thinks he's going to get chewed out.
In trouble. And
she says, Jose, I got to tell you something. I've been doing this a long time, and I'm a very good judge of character. And there's something you need to know about yourself. And he goes, what? And she says, you're a leader. You're a born leader. I want you to come back next week. I want you to help me run the bridge program. And here, this beautiful lady is calling him a leader when everyone else has been calling him a pain in the butt, and he's not going to disappoint her. So he comes back next week, and he goes, Miss Renee, what can I do? And she says, well, I'll tell you what, I need somebody to read the guidelines tonight. So now he's reading the guidelines. Right? So he's not going to mess up the guidelines. He's the one that read the guidelines. And Jose is now 40 years old. He's one of our best friends, and he's still with the program.
Wow.
And he's a pillar of the community. He's one of the greatest guys you'll ever meet. But on the dime, she changed his whole perspective of his life. On the dime.
And that's has a direct impact on the world. So technically changing one person.
Yeah, and he reaches out to other people and youth. And like I said, he's still a volunteer in the program all these years later. And he's one of our closest friends.
That's a great story.
So
we never know.
So we never know. What we say to people, could either destroy them or build them up.
Right.
That we have to be very careful of our words.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
What was the major challenge you had to overcome through all this? We talked about fear. Was it fear?
Mm-hmm.
Was it low self-esteem? Was it your circumstance? What was it in your mind the biggest challenge you've had to overcome when you look back?
Mm-hmm. I would say that when you have goals, that are expensive, like running companies and that kind of stuff, you have to take risk. You have to sign contracts. You have to make promises, and sometimes you have to, and then you have to back them up. So the biggest challenge is you keep having to find ways to pay for your dreams. That's and if your dreams are running companies, then that's pretty much what you think about sometimes is, okay, how can I create this? I remember needing to create as much as $30,000 in a matter of 6 weeks, or I was going to bite the dust. And you know what? Your brain just goes up that big, and next thing you know, you find yourself in opportunities that present them. They say when the teacher is ready, or when the student is ready. Well, I always felt that when the money is needed, the opportunity will appear. And so I would just figure out, okay, I got 3 more weeks to figure this out. But you know what? By the grace of God, and it's a matter, it's faith and it's belief, but you just know somehow or another it's going to work out, and you just keep believing that, and it all comes together, But that, I would say fear of not being able to financially support my dreams. That would probably be one that haunted me the most.
Okay.
Because you always have to bite off more than you can chew if you're going to be successful.
If you're growing, you're kind of in that cycle until you hit it.
Yeah.
There's always a point for every person where they feel like they finally fulfilled their dream. Do you remember when you look back, was there a point you said, you know what, you really felt that fulfillment and that sense of, wow, I'm living my dream, or I'm living my highest aspirations?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember a moment or a point that you felt that way?
Yeah, it was yesterday.
Yesterday?
After all these years, you know?
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Because up until now, I was the one that was the director of all of the material, you know, and now I built the Chivapedia, and other people are now starting to build their own platforms using the Achievopedia platform. And just in the last few days, as we're moving into our early at the soft launch and then the early adopter programs and stuff, people are starting to actually bring in their own vision to my vision, and I can now step back and they can take the Achievopedia platform and they can take it to whatever community of people they want to reach. So it took 29 years to get here. See, I didn't want to die with all the material. You know that up until now,
Right.
if I died, everything was buried with me because I was the only one that kept kind of like the wheels spinning. So my whole dream since the beginning was to create something that could outlive me, that wouldn't need my interaction for it to continue. And by January 1st, I could totally walk away from the whole thing, and it's going to keep on getting bigger and bigger. So it took me, in January 1st would be my 30th year, so it took me 30 years to get to that point where it could run without me. And
Wow.
I'll still be involved as like a spokesperson, but the whole system and it's really members becoming empowered and empowering other members. So it's a program that will grow exponentially as people get involved and they use the program, and they can keep spreading it out amongst whether it be their family, their friends, their businesses.
Yeah.
And I can just pretty much light it and get out of the way. But so really, it's only been in the last few days that I've seen it start
Wow.
to multiply.
See, I just want to make a point here how good my timing is. I happened to set this interview today, and we've been talking for a while, but no, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a feeling of relief,
Yeah.
because, really, I can't tell you how many times I prayed, God, keep me alive long enough at least to get to that point, that after right now, I was kidding God, you don't have to take me now.
Right,
I was
right.
saying that you got to keep me alive long enough so all this work doesn't get wasted, that I can walk away and if anything ever happens to me, because you see, most people in my field, when they pass on, their whole business dies. So Achievopedia isn't called my name. It's not about me. It's about people becoming
Yes.
empowered, empowering
Yes.
each other. So
Yep.
I'm not the center of it. I never was, but at the same time I had to come up with a nucleus that kept energizing itself and keep adding, and we use atoms as the metaphor, so so we call it atomic productivity, that everyone can just keep empowering one another. So that was the vision for years, and so here it's finally coming in between last week and next week, it's all starting to flip into that system.
And we're going to get more into that as we wrap up here.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give someone who hasn't found their dream yet, or has a dream but they have maybe doubt about pursuing it?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you make a list every area of your life and start making a list of every single wish and want you would want in that area, whether it be your family, whether it be just and let your imagination go, and then start seeing what the common denominator is. And is it helping people? Is it building something? Whatever it is, and what are the things you've always loved to do, and try to pull that all together into a mission or a purpose. A lot of people miss the point that it's a life of service is the most
Yes.
empowering life. That a lot of people they lose sight because sometimes we see people who tend to accumulate a lot of wealth, and we see them as successful,
Right.
when it's actually what leads to a happier life, accumulating money or accumulating love. That sometimes people don't realize that the most successful people in the world are the ones that build love into their lives.
That is
and
so true, Mario.
love of what they're doing, love of
Yes.
people around them. That they don't, and other people that don't do that, they could have all the tea, all the money and tea in China, but you know what? There's an emptiness. So it's not that hard to be successful. It's just understanding how to make decisions based upon love, and don't be afraid to help other people do what they want to do.
I'm glad you said that, because there's a study called the Harvard study. I don't know if you've ever heard of it,
Mm.
but it talks about how they took a class of Harvard, and the top achievers were the ones that had goals.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the loosely translation of it. But I went back and did the research myself.
Yeah.
And the story's often miscommunicated. And what I learned is that the most successful people had the best relationships.
Oh, really?
So when you dig deeper, although they were very financially successful at a high level and they did have goals, when you went back and peeled the onion back, the relationships were there. So I'm glad you brought that up. Along the same lines of that previous question, what would you tell your younger self? If you could go back and tell that young guy, that freshman or maybe even younger, what would you tell him about this journey, and what guidance would you give him?
Well, it's what I wouldn't tell him.
It's what you wouldn't tell him.
I wouldn't tell him it's going to take 30 years. Okay. He would have quit.
Okay.
That I mean, when you add 30 years from now, that would be like 2044. If you start working on a goal today and someone said, you'll achieve this by 2044, you're not going to be too happy. So I'm glad that that I just had this optimistic outlook, and just kept going. There's really nothing I would have done different or thought different, because whatever mistakes I made is what I had to learn. So I kind of feel like I'm not going to tell that guy anything. He has to figure it out, but he's had the belief system in the beginning of what he wanted to do. And that's the most important thing, is you have to have confidence that you're put here for a purpose. And you have to discover what that purpose is, but there's many purposes. Each area of your life, there's a purpose.
Right. And
so you have to somehow find a way to tie them all in together and just become your own person, and just follow your heart, because that's how God talks to us too. He gives us dreams. He doesn't give us an ambition for something if he doesn't give you the tools to do it. But you don't know where the tools are. You just have to just believe that you got them, and that you'll figure it out along the way.
Absolutely.
So I wouldn't tell me anything that I didn't already think back then, because even though I was naive, that ignorance worked in my favor, because I wouldn't have learned what I've learned if I didn't make the mistakes I made.
That's a great point. That's a characteristic of a lot of entrepreneurs. They don't know all the answers. There's a certain naivety there, but there's that belief. Because once that belief is worked on, then you believe no matter what happens, I can make it happen.
And life's a learning process.
Yep.
You just keep building on what you're learning. So you really never fail, because even in failure, there's education.
That's right.
And so they say there's only two ways to fail: don't start and quit. But as long as you keep the process going, then all you're doing is you're experiencing a transformational growth thing that keeps going. And by the grace of God, you just keep going. And
absolutely.
Until
move forward.
Yeah. Until
FWD. Move forward.
Yeah. That's it. Forward, and live a life of progress. And eventually, you live long enough, you'll hit all your goals.
What fulfills you most about your dream?
I would say the fact that it all came from the imagination. The fact that this giant.
So wait, it didn't come from your logical brain then? Just want to make that point.
Yeah.
Didn't come from logic, right?
It
came from your imagination.
No. In fact, I have stacks of scrap paper in my office, and my wife even brings home scrap paper for me. And just like you had this paper right here, all right, where eventually this becomes scrap paper, at one point in your life. So I have a stack of this, and I have 2 or 3 clipboards, and all around my house, and everything that goes in my head that I think of, I jot down on a piece of scrap paper, and at the end of the week, I probably have about 30 ideas on scrap paper, and I have to transfer those ideas onto a Word document. Then I have to see where those ideas fit in whatever puzzle I'm building in my life. But the idea that it's like a popcorn machine, you never know when,
That's
but
right.
they keep popping. So to think that whatever started out on scrap paper, corporations are purchasing to run their companies, that nonprofits are purchasing to help the people that they're reaching out to, that families are going to be using to empower their children. The fact that all that's happening now on the internet, and it's becoming a real entity. You ask me what do I feel most proud about? That's probably the most amazing thing. That it all came from the imagination, and that's our greatest asset. Everything in this room, everything in our life started out as a figment of someone's imagination.
That's right.
Whether it be art, whether it be architectural, whether it doesn't matter. It all comes from the creative part of our brain, and it's a matter of getting that muscle. We're taught back when we were kids, stop daydreaming. Well, there's something called deep think, and we have to take time to almost every day, probably at least 5 times a week, I'll spend an hour and a half just by myself with nothing around me but that piece of paper and just thinking, just thinking, just thinking. And it's almost like a meditation, but you know what? It's the same thinking I did when I was in 5th grade and I was bored in math class. I'm looking out the window and I'm just like, it's the same thinking. You know, I'm the 5th grader still looking out the window, just thinking about stuff, you know, and but you got to allow yourself, you got to allow your brain to go to that level of creativity, and whatever pops in your head, you got to write it down. And it taps into that subconscious mind where all the information is. So that would be my advice to anyone that wants to have a more fun life, is just think it up. Think it up.
Think it up. Create it.
And know that no problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking. You will just solve the problems from where you are now to get you where you want to be. Just solve them one at a time, and you'll get there.
That's great advice. And well, in closing, I was going to ask you what's next, but I want you to talk about Achievepedia because it's truly an amazing accomplishment. It came from your imagination, and it's going to be a global situation, and it's going to impact. You said 10 million. I don't
well,
know.
it's infinity as far as where you go. You know?
Then why don't you talk about just closing on maybe a little bit about Achievepedia, and then what's next, because it's always about what's next. You built this up to be sustainable without you. It's going to grow. But what's next for Mario? So maybe about Achievepedia, and then what's next for you in closing?
Well, Achievepedia is different because for 20 years, from 85 to 2005, I had to come up with a system that was universal. So if I went into a doctor's office, a dental office, it was a how to make this dental office better system. If I was in a real estate office, it was how to sell real estate. If I was working with top levels of corporate people, it would be a management system. At the same time, people were losing 100 pounds on the program because no matter what, so it had to be something universal. In Achievepedia, people buy a membership, they automatically learn the system, it's on-demand training, then they go into communities where people are putting together idea banks and they're working with each other. So it doesn't matter what the community is. It could be CEOs, breast cancer survivors, it could be family management, vegan cooking. It doesn't matter, because the system of what it takes to identify a goal and achieve it is the same no matter what it is you want to achieve. You know, so it's universal. It's kind of like the same 8 notes in music. You can write any kind of song in any kind of language. So everyone's working from a universal system called atomic productivity, and everyone just keeps spreading out into these different communities, building more and more communities. What's next is there's going to be two sub-sites, Youth Achievia for 13 and 19-year-olds, and Atomic Families for families who are at risk and families who are on assistance. So we're taking the profits from Achievepedia and we're creating a foundation called the Achievepedia Foundation, and we're going to be empowering inner city youth and inner city families throughout the country with the knowledge and the power to empower themselves and empower one another.
That's awesome. I didn't even know that. That's a new addition, so I'm glad.
So I'm kind of like leaving the building, and I'm going to be going into Youth Achievia and Atomic Families and letting Achievepedia be run by the friends that asked to be a part of it. And so I have like a team of people that are ready to take over. I never built Achievepedia so I could run a company. I built Achievepedia so it could be a service to the community worldwide. But my passion and my wife's passion is to work with the inner city kids.
So that's what you're going to do once Achievepedia is up. You're going to spend your time contributing.
Oh yeah, we're going to be working on that real hard, and because they're like lost members of society, the inner city.
Yeah.
It's been, I don't think a politician ran on helping the poor since Bobby Kennedy. So they need an advocate, and we know the beauty and the power of the inner city families and the inner city children, and we know what they can do, and so I'll be happy spending the rest of my life just helping that, make that happen.
No, that's an incredible thing. I didn't know about that, so I'm glad to learn about that part of it.
I can't wait to get there.
Yeah, you can't wait to.
Yeah, I can't wait till I can get to that part of my life.
Well, I want to just encourage everybody who's watching this to check out Achievepedia, because it doesn't matter where you are, corporate America, nonprofit, just about any organization can plug into this and create a training platform to share ideas and to really be involved and create integrity with the training as well. And I just want to thank you for sharing that. And I want to thank you for taking this time. I've really enjoyed this visit, and there's some amazing information in here. I always suggest these interviews, watch them back again. I do them once a month. I select these people, I handpick them, so that you guys can listen to it and watch it back again. There's a ton of ideas in here. So I just want to thank you, and thanks again, Mark.
Great. Thanks, Austin. My pleasure.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
All right, great.
Appreciate it.
Great.